Hi guys, another wee case study for you. So I'm concentrating this time on working with an older saddle. So sometimes I have a rider that has had a saddle for a very long time. They've ridden ponies in this saddle, they've come onto their first horse in this saddle, and they themselves are quite connected to the saddle. They feel that that is part of their balance, it's part of their position. It's very hard for them to move into something different. So in this particular case, the horse was 15.3. The saddle that she's had since ponies was 15 and a half. The rider was as tall as me, which is about 5'6", and really long in her femur bone. So people focus on seat size and think, well, I need a 17.5-inch seat because I have a bigger bum. That's not the case. It's not how it works. You might want a wider seat if your bottom's quite big because you might feel like you're under-seated. But really the size of your seat and the size of your saddle is determined by your femur bone mostly. So I'll measure your femur bone when I'm doing a fitting with you, and it's to determine whether or not, if your horse only has a 16.5-inch carriage, you're going to need a plus flap. So you're going to need more flap in front of you to allow for your femur bone to keep you in the centre of the saddle. So there's no point me putting you in a saddle that fits your horse if it's putting you on top of the cantle way back here when I need you here in the centre. So in order to get my rider in the centre and keep their knee within the block of the saddle, if you can picture it, I extend the flap. I give them a bit more flap, and that lets them bring their knee forward and still keep their heel underneath themselves. If the flap's only here, it's short, the knee comes in, it comes either over the saddle here, which makes the rider feel insecure, or it puts their knee too far down and puts their ankle behind them, and then they're tilting in front of the motion. So there's often times I have to put a fully grown adult in a 16.5-inch seat. If the horse has a short carriage space, that's necessary. We can't just put you in the saddle you want. If the horse doesn't have 17.5 inches of carriage space in its back, we're going to put weight in the lumbar, and the lumbar is the most sensitive part of the horse. We know that the horse's supraspinous ligament is connected to the spine, and the spine carries all of the intestines. All of the internal organs are hanging there. So he already has a big job to do with his spine, holding all these internal organs. Never mind then place a rider weight on top of it. So we need to make sure when I place you on top of your horse, you're through his carriage space and you're through the centre of gravity. That way you're not putting too much pressure on him that he starts to hollow, or her. And if they start to hollow, all of those intestines get sensitive. Everything gets sore because they're hollowing and they're trying to hold everything up. It's why we want a horse always to work through. Working through is not about prettiness. It's not about their nose being down. It's not. It's about your horse stepping through behind and rounding through the back so that they can carry everything they have to carry for their own well-being, and then you on top of that. A horse wasn't designed to carry us. So we do everything we can to make this as good as possible. So this wee rider in a 15.5-inch saddle. Our horse was a big horse. It had a carriage space we could use. We could easily go into a 17-inch saddle on this horse. And there was no reason why we shouldn't use that space. But the rider was so used to her own saddle that when we changed it and put her in a saddle that fitted the horse perfectly, she was riding up and down over her pommel. We had about this much space behind her, and she just kept rising over the shoulder and looked really out of balance. Now, how do we correct that? Because the thing is, the saddle fitted the horse really well. It actually fitted the rider really well, but she had been so used to being under-seated. And because she was under-seated, and instead of being through the horse's centre of gravity here in a normal saddle, she was sitting here right at the base of the wither. And she had got so used to sitting here that when I put her in a saddle that allowed her to sit here, she didn't know how to sit there. She didn't know how to sit through the centre anymore. She had spent such a long time sitting too far forward. And obviously when she was on her little ponies, that 15.5 put her through the centre. So when you move into a horse, there's a really good reason why we move out of our childhood saddles, if you want, and we move to the correct saddle with the horse that we move into. And I highly recommend, it doesn't have to be about budget. It does not have to be about budget. If you only have a small budget, but you have a pony saddle, trade that in. Get a saddle that fits your horse so that you can sit through its centre, so you can understand it, and it'll improve you as a rider because you'll feel where you should be. So what did we do? I put her back in her small saddle. Is it the right thing to do? Temporarily. So I got her in her old saddle, I got her to ride round, and I explained where she was sitting. I then moved the saddle about 3 inches back into where the saddle should actually sit, so that she was through the centre. So she had all this wither in front of her the whole way down to the flat of the wither. She was like, why am I halfway down my horse's back? I said, because that's where you need to be. And I let her ride round in that saddle so she could feel herself through the centre above the girth line, that she was 100% through where the horse could carry, and the horse rounded. She was like, my goodness, I've had millions of lessons. No one can get my horse to round. I don't understand this. Why is it round? I said, because you're no longer making him carry you on the floor. You're allowing him to step through. You're allowing him to work properly in himself by placing yourself in the right position in the saddle that you love and you feel good in. And that feeling was enough that when I put her back into a bigger saddle and I sat her through the centre, she already knew where she should be. She felt comfortable and she rode correctly. She was able to rise her trot without coming up and down the pommel. She stayed in the centre and she was able to tilt through her hips like this with her rise rather than like this. Yeah. And it takes time. We don't just fit horses. It's the hardest part of my job is not fitting the horse. I will have 4 or 5 things in my van, hopefully, that fit your horse. And I'll put them on your horse. The hardest part of my job is always making sure that rider feels comfortable, confident and secure, that they can then let that horse meet its potential. Because there's no point me putting you in the absolute perfect saddle for your horse if it makes you feel out of balance or it throws your position. And we've ridden a certain way for so long, such a long time, that it's really hard to change. So even a rider that's coming out of 17.5-inch GP and I put them in a jump, they're like, oh, it feels wrong. A rider coming out of a wide twist, that's the part that sits between your hip bones, and a narrow twist, will feel the difference. They'll say, wow, this doesn't feel right. My legs aren't where they should be. And after a few rides, you become accustomed to your new saddle and you get used to it. But that's a big part of the job, is understanding why you need to sit where you sit and the benefit to your horse and the benefit to you as a rider and how much more secure and easy your job becomes. Because when you're through the centre and your horse is doing their job as easily as possible, you're giving them all the tools to do their job easily, your job as a rider becomes much more simple because you can concentrate on tweaking the small things rather than worrying about the big things, like the getting them through. Everyone concentrates on a contact. And I'm probably the worst person to give you this advice because my coach, an absolutely lovely lady called Sonia, and Penny, will tell you that I allow their nose to sit out the front. Do I allow it on purpose? No. Do I know I'm doing it? No. What I feel is my horse stepping through from behind. I feel him correct through the back. I feel him coming up under my seat bones. And as long as I can feel that, I think, well, he's not damaging his back. He's working well. And then I don't concentrate enough in saying, but actually, son, let's get that neck correct as well now. And let's get all that beautiful back end impulsion into my hands so that then we complete the picture. But I would rather do that than just concentrate on the head and have nothing behind. So my advice today, as a rider, have a look at where you're sitting. Get someone to take a photo of you sitting in your saddle and have a look at where the girth is. So is your girth directly below your saddle? Is it coming down in a straight line, or is it coming like this into a forward girth groove or this into a backward girth groove? If it's coming in a straight line down, are you as a rider sitting with shoulders, hip, heel in that line of that girth? Because if you are, you're most likely through your horse's centre of gravity. If your horse has a really forward girth groove, and therefore by girthing it up, the saddle's sitting like this, you need an anatomical. You need something that's going to sit in the girth groove and bring your girth back so that your saddle stays central. Once you're there, you're going to ride well. If the saddle's in a forward girth groove like this little 15.5 pony, and it's coming straight up behind your horse's shoulder and it's pinching, like this is soft skin on us. It's soft skin on your horse too. And if it's sitting right behind there, and every time your horse rotates, it's having to catch and catch, you'll get what's called girth gall, or your horse will become girthy and difficult. But you'll also be in front of the movement. The horse won't be able to move its scapula freely through. You won't be sitting in the centre of their back. And if you're not sitting in the centre of their carriage space, that's within the vertebrae, the T's, the T1 to T18, that's where you want to be sitting central. So you've got your T1 on the very top of the wither, and it's coming all the way down and all the way along the back, and then we go L1, L2, L3, L4. L1 to 4 is your lumbar. We never place weight there. Never. Cannot go that long. Anything within the T-zone is where we want to be, and then I want my rider sitting nice and central between the end of the wither blade and the end of the T's. So I'll measure that out. You'll see me measuring all the way from up here. Then I'll measure the flat of the back as well to see what space I have to get you in that carriage. If it's a really long wither, like a thoroughbred, then we're going to have a short carriage space, which means I'm going to have to work with a different cut in the saddle in order to get you through the centre, because the centre is going to be closer to that flat spot. That's why you need a good fitter. It's not just easy. It's not just this is the rules of saddle fitting. We have to look at every horse independently and then figure all that out. So I apologise, it's been a 9-minute video. That was not my intention. But hopefully it gives you some information you maybe didn't know before, and justifies why perhaps it's worth getting a really good fitter out to look at your animal.